Welcome back to the Morning Show here on Arise News. We will help Nigeria out of our current social, political, and economic problems. What form of political leadership will be most suited to Nigeria's current realities? What happened to the conveyor belt through which iconic leaders of the First Republic emerged into national prominence and took Nigeria to global recognition? These are some nostalgic and sometimes rhetorical questions which could have come from any book on the misuse of political power in Nigeria. But Professor Pat Utomi's new book, Why Not? Citizenship, State Capture, Creeping Fascism, and Criminal Hijack of Politics in Nigeria is a downright indictment of all factors that have combined to reduce governance and political leadership in Nigeria to a winner-takes-all affair, currently breaking the back of the common man. This morning, we have here the author of that book, Professor Pat Utomi, one-time presidential advisor, a renowned political economist and management expert, as well as founder of the Center for Value in Leadership and African Democratic Congress. Welcome to the program, Professor Utomi.
Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Well, this looks like a family conversation with Lillian, joining us. I was privileged to be the reviewer of your book, Why Not? And the first thing, I noticed in that book is your emphasis on the complicit middle. In other words, the complicit middle class. You made it look like the middle class in Nigeria has abdicated its responsibility. But there are people who believe that the middle class itself is a victim of the failure of leadership. And maybe you should have been lenient with the middle class, so badly treated, so overwhelmed.
It's important for the middle class to reclaim its historic role. See, you're going to have in any political system the outliers, the guys who are in this for different kinds of games. Outliers, on one hand, who are the idealists who want to build a great society. Outliers who are just vagabonds who need power for self-aggrandizement. But ultimately, the balancing comes from a middle that has a sense of ownership of a country's history. It was not by accident that it was the middle in the 70s that captured the essence of the Nigerian state, that, said as undergraduate students will forego one meal a week to raise money to fight for the liberation movement in Southern Africa. It was not by accident that any time anything went wrong in Nigeria, before you knew what was going wrong, the students were on the streets. It became the conscience of the nation. The great executives of tomorrow, as it has become yesterday now, the Felix Ohiweres of this world, were on the streets protesting the Anglo-Nigerian treaty as students at the University of Ibadan, and so on and so forth. But we have reached a state where the middle seems to be determined to doing one of two things, or three maybe, just survive. If this road is immotorable, leading to my house, well, I can buy an SUV, even if it means I have to be a little corrupt and cheat there, here, buy an SUV, and I'll survive that road. If the schools are impossible, I can do whatever it is, bend, kill, do whatever, earn enough to send my children to that expensive school in Europe, instead of, how do we fix our schools? Because we're not having public conversation as we're having here, which is usually something that the intellectual elite bring. People are bereft of ideas. Our system doesn't have ideas. Let me get to the heart of this matter. Our country is dying. Anybody who has any brain or any eye can see that. And I'm looking, look, I saw your segment before. This country is going to be in a deep economic recession in the next 2 years. We're going to be going to the IMF. If things are going the way they're going, IMF is going to just dismiss us because they don't think there's much thinking going on in Nigeria. We already have a country in which a great swath of territory does not belong to Nigeria. Between Kaduna, Niger, Zamfara, and Sokoto State, there's an area bigger than a country that's run by bandits. And the government of Nigeria has no authority in it. I'm not talking of the traditional northeast areas. Our country is at war. I used to say moral equivalence of war. No, it's not a moral equivalence. We're at war. What we should be doing is all thinking people should be putting on their caps and sitting together and saying, hey, we've got to save our country. And that's why I am really, really worried that we have a political class that doesn't have the capacity to actually engage these matters. You know, so that's what the problem is. And the middle class has to. What is the middle class doing? They're living. I have an account in one bank. I'm into my 4th account manager in 2 years. Each one has left for Canada. You know, is that how we build a country? We must begin to have conversation. First of all, the conversation has to establish that we are in trouble. I told a story a few weeks ago about a work conference, thought leaders meeting in Sweden. I was at about a decade or so ago. And one very well-regarded person is Chatham's rules, so I can mention the person's name or whatever. In that meeting were several former European prime ministers. I was the only person from Sub-Saharan Africa in that meeting. And we're talking geopolitics and all of that. And they looked at West Africa. And one really famous person during the Balkan War, we saw him on TV every day. You know, he was one of the leading global officials. I said, you know, the problem is that Nigeria has lost its strategic relevance. I mean, there's this Princeton Lyman thing that's going around.
Yes, yes.
Princeton Lyman was my friend.
Yeah.
And I know he said those kinds of things.
He says Nigeria is a strategic failure and has become irrelevant to the world. And he was ambassador in Nigeria and also in South Africa.
My very good friend, I gave a going away dinner when he finished his term in Nigeria. Now, when at this conference
and you used in your book the phrase strategic irrelevance.
Yes, because at this conference in Sweden, or this meeting in Sweden of global thought leaders, this famous European leader said, you know, 30 years ago, no global power would want to do something in Africa and not pause for a second and say, how would Nigeria react? So, but today, they can step into Nigeria without bothering about Nigeria. That's what's happened to us in the last 30 or so odd years. So how did we get here? The only way to begin to deal with that kind of issue is find thinking people to sit together. But we don't have public conversation anymore because people are retreating into the lager and either leaving or saying, I can survive in my enclave. That's not how you build a nation.
It certainly is not how you build a nation. And it's interesting that you use the term criminal hijack of politics in the title of the book. I think that's quite a strong term to use, especially when we're at a period where we're facing serious major threats to our democracy. So let's analyze some of these threats to our democracy that we're facing right now that you really tried to highlight and touch on in your book.
Well, first of all, is the failure of a political party system. That is central to Nigeria's current failures. What are political parties? Ironically, part of the path that led to the founding of the APC and a new order was a leadership newspaper's annual lecture in Abuja several years ago, which I was a speaker, and the subject was political parties. I still recall very the passion after I finished speaking. Paul Unongo ran from where he was to me. I said, look, if we have to lock this door, you people don't leave this place until you decide how we're going to get rid of this thing that we have in Nigeria. In that lecture, I went back to Roberto Michel's 1911 treatise on political parties. The whole idea of the iron law of oligarchy and power political parties. And I tried to deal in some depth with the subject of what political parties really are. First of all, political parties are aggregators of thought. That's a starting point. As aggregators of thought, they are also a recruitment agency for minds that will align to the thought that is aggregated for the purpose of implementing how society is organized. Now, we have managed to come to this point when no political party in Nigeria really means anything. What do they stand for? If I mention a political party, can you tell me what that party stands for?
No ideologies. It's hard to tell.
Nothing, no ideas at all. Because there are no ideas, they are easily vulnerable to hijack. And then they went down the track of political parties as incorporated businesses. And these are the owners of the business. You know, all you need is for these owners of the business to say, okay, you are our man. A second thing is a capture of the Nigerian state. And the very idea of capture as survival. A number of people put in some advantaged positions, sometime during the course of our history, during military rule particularly, came to capture the Nigerian state. It became their property. I recall once saying, you know, no more than 60 people have owned Nigeria for the last 50 years. And a friend of mine, who is a very senior security person, laughed. I said, oh, boy, how can 60? That's too many. There are not more than 15. And I said, yes, I know there are not more than 15, but, you know, I had to make it look like, you know. So state capture. I go to South Africa. I serve on the boards of a couple of South African companies. And they are forever belly aching about state capture, Zuma, the Guptas. And I say, people have not seen state capture. If you want to see state capture, come to Nigeria. But equally dangerous, in fact, if not more dangerous, and this is part of my attack, if you will, on the complicit middle, is the pretentious business elite. Pretentious, very, very pretentious. That says, I'm not near politics. I don't want to get near politics.
Well, but Prof, I will ask that you hold your thoughts on that, and then we'll take a short break.
Absolutely.
When we return, we'll continue with that. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the morning show here on the Arise News channel. Still with us in the studio is Professor Pat Utomi, a political economist, politician, strategist, investor, professor of entrepreneurship, and founder of the Center for Values in Leadership in Nigeria. Prof, you've been talking about capture as survival, as a strategy by Nigerian politicians. But there's, we once had on this program Professor Patrick Otieno Lumumba, who holds the same view with you, who says, look, politicians in Africa are thieves. They just want a place at the dinner table. And he once came to Nigeria and said, the people who surround President Buhari are thieves. That President Buhari is the only person who is trying to, promote values and principles. And you had a taste of that dysfunctionality in Nigerian politics when you tried to run as a governor in your home state of Delta State, and which is a subject you address in your book. Are you convinced, really, that Nigerian politics is, as you have argued, and as Professor Lumumba concurs, is an arena for one-liners, ritualists, conmen, thugs, rogues, bandits who are just interested in money?
Because we have not made a deliberate effort to build political parties. That's what it has become. Unfortunately, there's a criminal hijack of the process. Because we also give in so easily to impunity. It is easy for those 419ers, those conmen who get together to get away with murder. I was just reading the papers yesterday, I think it was, and a whole deputy national chairman of my party, the APC, said that the primaries of 2018-19 were a complete farce. This is absolutely correct. Primaries didn't take place. I want anybody to prove the contrary to me. There were no primaries. So the criminals managed to impose their will on the Nigerian people. The really difficult part of this is the delegitimization of the political process and the Nigerian state therefrom. In modern governance, Legitimacy is a very, very important concept. One of the best writings on it, of course, being Simon Martin Lipset's famous treatise in the First New Nation. The politics of power erosion that flows from this kind of delegitimizing the state, delegitimizing political parties, is a descent to anarchy, where most Nigerians actually are totally contemptuous of politics and politicians. I watched, that was Lauren Yami's review of Aremo Segun Oshoba's book. It was a scathing, contemptuous derision of Nigerian politicians in what you call the illiberal political class. But you see, the thing that amazes me about the character of the current politicians shows what really has happened to Nigeria, is that they were all smiling and walking with swag. Somebody has just told you are a bunch of idiots. You are all smiling and hugging each other.
What a shame.
It's amazing. Really amazing what has happened to this country. No sense of shame, nothing. So we've got a bad situation, very bad situation. If we had political parties that had emerged, and I want to, because there's a tendency to think it's just politicians. It's a collapse of culture in Nigeria. You move to the business class. The business class thinks, just like the middle class person that says, if I can buy an SUV, I can get away from the bad roads. If I can have my own borehole, I can get away from the failure of water reticulation and all of that. The business elite begins to think, look, if I can capture the regulator, things will work well for me. So we've gotten, and Utomi side raised this issue, but I was very unhappy that he didn't make it a stout declaration in that conversation with the central bank governor and co. It seemed like some funny thing. You know, you, Oba, you know, you and Aliko, and who else did he mention? You know, you have the...
Maybe Jim Ovia.
And Jim. you have... That's nonsense as far as I'm concerned. They have captured the regulator. You know what that means? They may make a lot of money, but it means the entrepreneurial class will not emerge and Nigeria will be mired in poverty for a long time. That's what's happened to Nigeria. This, you know, to survive, you've got to either capture the state or capture the regulator or capture... It's a very dangerous fuck. And the reason that we don't realize how dangerous... These people are not bad people, oh. They're just thinking their own survival. But heck, they're destroying tomorrow. So you need intellectuals. You need people who will call the attention of everybody to the conversation to understand what is going on so that people can say, wait a minute, what's the best interest? What leads to the common good of all? We can move forward.
Absolutely. Now, I know you were speaking about the elections and how with your party there really and truly weren't really any primaries, as you said. But let's take that back to the 2019 elections that we had. This is still something that a lot of people are having discussions about, basically because a lot of people cannot get over how the 2019 elections went. I would like your analysis on the 2019 elections, your analysis as well on INEC as an institution. Do you think INEC as an institution is independent, as it should be? What exactly do you think is curtailing that institution? Let's look at electoral reform for a second.
You know, it comes down to the same fundamental truth of this moment. The mindset is capture. So you're going to run for election. The first thing you think of is, how do I capture INEC? This is the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah.
You know, people are asking you, okay, you're going to run. Do you have INEC? Do you have the party chairman? Do you have... Wait a minute. Is it not supposed to be about the people asking them what they want? Now they don't think in those terms. They think, how have you captured these institutions? And that cannot be called a democracy.
Yeah.
And... you know, my real worry is not the esoterics of concepts, phenomena, democracy, institutions. It's no. It's because of this point about delegitimizing the Nigerian state. When it gets to a point that nobody thinks anything of the state, what you get is anarchy. Pretty much we're driving down Robert Kaplan's road, becoming anarchists here. Sad, very, very sad. But my question, as a patriot, if I might dare say that myself, is how do we recapture, how do we bring Nigeria back to relevance?
Which leads me to the next question. Although on the point you have made about legitimacy, I would have loved to ask, are you convinced that this government, the APC government that is still there in Abuja, is it not having, does it have legitimacy, or you think it has a crisis of legitimacy? But beyond that, how do we rescue Nigeria from those who have captured it at the level of the state? Because I guess this is one of the issues addressed in your book.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I think that it's important for everybody to recognize that the state has been captured. People know it generally, but we don't organize our thoughts in public conversation around it. If we recognize state capture, then people begin to say, wait a minute, this should not be that way. What must we do to do this? And then people become, the champions of capture become less confident in their impunity, you know, because they know that they are exposed. So the reality of what they are doing is before the people. Then we move to the state of reforms. I think that if the state is to save itself, because if it does not act, yes, it's happening. Look, I went to Kaduna the other day from Abuja. Like everybody else, I headed for the train station. Yeah. And there were generals, there were all kinds of people with their army battalions guarding them who came to the train station. I get to Kaduna, and I meet let's say, senior leader of the place, let's put it that way for decency's sake. And he says to me, if you looked up, you will see there was a helicopter escorting that train you were on. because we have intelligence that these guys are planning to drive cattle to block the railways and attack the railway. And I think 3 days ago, there was a riot at the station or something. They were holding the tickets. 3,000 naira train ticket was selling for 30,000 naira.
Wow.
Now, when you get to that state, if the political class isn't running around saying, can we hold a conference about how to save this thing, then they are more stupid than I think.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there. Let's stick on to the subject of capturing for a second. Our economy seems captured as well. It seems as though our economy has been bundled and literally thrown in a dustbin at this point, and our single-digit economic growth rates are not going to do us any favors. Professor, if you were the president of Nigeria, what policies would you put in place to ensure that before the end of your first term, Nigeria gets to at least a double-digit growth rate, real growth rate as well?
Well,
hold your thoughts, Professor. Sorry, let's go on a very quick break. As soon as we're back, the conversation will continue. Stay with us. Welcome back. Professor Pat Utomi, one-time presidential advisor, a renowned political economist and management expert, as well as Center for Value in Leadership in African Democratic Congress, is here with us on the show still. And before we went on a break, Professor, I asked you a question. If you were the president of Nigeria, what would you do to ensure that before the end of your first term, Nigeria is on the road or has achieved a double-digit economic real growth rate? This is also considering the falling price in oil, etc., and the serious need to diversify our economy at this point in time.
Well, I think it's appropriate to start this with a conversation I had with an Englishman at the World Bank more than 15 years or so ago. And his plate included Nigeria, Sudan, Sierra Leone. And I said to him, what does Nigeria have in common with these kinds of countries? He says, well, I won't say this in public, but between you and I, Pat, in many ways, Nigeria is like a post-conflict economy.
Wow.
You know?
Well, fair points.
You know, but now we've entered a real conflict. Then there wasn't all these conflicts around. But today, Nigeria is a conflict economy. Let's be very straight up, front, honest about it. So, how do you manage a post-conflict economy? In many ways, that can be opportunity. I mean, look at Rwanda, where they came out of conflict too. Look at Vietnam. I mean, I was in Vietnam last year, and it's amazing what has happened in Vietnam. So, in a way, being a post-conflict economy can be a put-down, but it can be an opportunity. So ask yourself, what did Vietnam do that led to their remarkable growth after the war? What did Rwanda do that managed to get them on the track that they are traveling? I think that we must create an entrepreneurial economy in which the citizens are given opportunity to produce their way out of poverty. What we have currently is a rent economy in which people are sitting, oh, there's oil, and they're extracting rent in different points. We've got to... In 1996, I made what was an outrageous statement in an interview with the Economist. And the Economist's response was fair comment. I said, if we could just get all of Nigeria's generals and their politician friends, buy them an island, and give them all of Nigeria's oil resources to take with them, Nigeria will be better off. And the Economist said, fair comment. Fair comment. We're there. We are so resourced in talents of human beings that if we could just invest, first of all, have a strategy, national strategy. I think we don't have one. And the strategy that I would go for would be based on the latent comparative advantage of our country. What are comparative strengths in different parts of the country? And there is one for just about every part of Nigeria. How do we orient education to prepare the people to produce into global value chains from those endowments and become global leaders in those endowments? And have an industrial policy that essentially focuses not a broad import substitution, industrialization kind of tariff protection. No, industrial policy focused on those particular endowments that will aid becoming global leaders in those particular value chains. We'll produce our way into where Vietnam has, the way Vietnam has gone. We'll do, what China is doing is what some of us predicted or suggested Nigeria should do before China started doing it and all of that. But right now, the Nigerian elite is so steeped in rent and extracting rent that they really are not bothered if they can manage to have the best of life from the rent they're extracting, whatever the price of oil is $10 for one, it's okay. Which is why the latest report suggests that in terms of income distribution, Nigeria is a tragedy for West Africa. A few people extract all this rent at the top. Most of the people are living in abject poverty. We must change that, not by ideological banging of the table, but by essentially creating an entrepreneurial capitalist economy in which the people really produce their way. The problem is that when we look at distribution of income, we tend to look at distribution of revenues, distribution of money. Never worked. If you look at Nigeria, who has received the most money? People will think Niger Delta. No, go and do the arithmetic. It is those who have the most local governments, it is most who have, and that's northern Nigeria. And they've gotten much, much poorer. So it's not about revenues. It's about how you direct creative talent towards enterprise and production. Production is the key to growth.
Yeah. Well, Prof, with that comment, you already answered a question we have not asked, which is about a plan to take another look at the revenue allocation formula in Nigeria. You have said, look, the people who get more money do not necessarily deliver in terms of serving the people. But I raised a question earlier about legitimacy, and I would like to go back to it. Do you think that this Buhari government, having taken over for a second term, has a crisis of legitimacy in the light of public responses to the administration and in the light of how the government has managed certain key issues after assuming office for a second term? Those key issues will include the naming of a cabinet, the announcement of ministerial nominees, that is, and the tardiness that we have witnessed in that regard, and also the handling of the crisis with the Islamic movement of Nigeria, otherwise known as the Shiites, and also the response to the attempt by Omoyele Sowore and his group to announce a revolution now public protest in the country.
The defining factor of the Nigerian condition for now is a crisis of legitimacy writ large across the board. I mean, the Nigerian people seem to be saying, what country are we in? There's a crisis of legitimacy from the people. There's a crisis of legitimacy globally. Unfortunately for me, I wander around this planet and people ask me questions. So there's a deep crisis of legitimacy, and how do we reconstruct this? This is a challenge before any people who understand leadership. My suggestion on how to reconstruct this was really to try and put together a war cabinet. That is to say, the things we used, like government of national unity and stuff like that, you know, what Gowon did in '67, and say, our country is at war, can we rebuild it? Unfortunately, the people who are not as smart as they pretend to be, who are just digging themselves further and further and further into a hole. And God forbid that the consequence come upon all of us, which would be very, very sad. But I think thinking people need to begin to stand up to say, wait a minute, instead of getting on the next plane to Canada. I too can go to Canada, you know. I actually have a visa. I have a visa. You know.
Well, the Canadians are not shutting people out like the Americans. Or let me say like Donald Trump.
Like Donald Trump, exactly. No, very interesting.
But the possibilities of what we can do includes beginning by serious-minded Nigerians across the board beginning to get together and say, let's have a... We can start as private conversation and then make it public conversation about where Nigeria is going. Because for me, you know, I made the point in the book.
You don't want to make specific comments on Showore, on the handling of the Zazaki...
No, I've made those severally. I've made those severally. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. I think the arrest of Showore is not the wisest decision anybody can make. They've just managed to increase his value. I mean, if you ignored him, he would just be another Nigerian raising his voice, and voices of everybody will come together. But now he's been elevated. My friend Sunola's column on the subject, I think, stands here, because Sunola was making the point, well, Showore just won the game.
Yeah,
by
you
the
have
action.
also called for revolution.
Hey, I've always called for
on the day of your book launch, you were talking about revolution. And I recall warning you that you should be careful, because that's not a word that is popular in Nigeria.
Do you see a problem with the word revolution? Because that seems to be at the center of the matter, that revolution is a threat of a word to this administration.
My friend Femi Falana is threatening to put on the witness stand all those who have used the word before.
He said
that includes everybody. So, no. So on the Showore factor, you know, my point is very clear. It was not the most clever thing to do. Which is the other one again?
Exactly.
I said it severally, that I don't know why they're holding this man. But you know, the even more, I don't know how they was thought through, unwise thing, I think, is that now we export him to India. Now we create Ayatollah Khomeini from Paris thing. I don't know if you remember the story
1989
of how Khomeini was then packaged out of Iran and sent to sent off. He was in Paris, and from there he inspired the revolution against Shah Mohammad Razi Pahlavi.
No, 1979.
The Iranian Revolution is 79 to 81.
81.
Yes. Iranian Revolution. Because I was living in the U.S. at the time. It was the joke I used to joke is, you Americans are so ignorant, you know. They couldn't even pronounce the word Iran. You know, those people in Iran.
Oh, yeah, I love that. Iran.
You know. So that's, again, under my view, under strategic error in decision. Was it under one? Showore, Zelzak, you know. Anyway, the bottom line of all of this is that we need thinking.
We need thinking.
In how we govern.
We need thinking, and you said we need conversation as well. Doctor, recall when we had on the show, we had the chairman of the FIRS on the show, and he was here speaking to us, that's about Tunde Fallow, he was here speaking to us about ways in which they're trying to diversify the tax base, etc. A lot of Nigerians are getting concerned about an increase in VAT or an addition of VAT, and I spoke to him about the fact that there are areas that should be taxed that are not being taxed. We don't like to address the issue that we have of illegal mining going on in the country. You don't want to look at that as another way to diversify the tax base. And instead, we're ignoring this conversation and we're shutting it out. What are we going to do about this situation? Why is it hard for us to have these conversations? Who are we threatening in the government by speaking about these issues? Why do we put them on the back burner and raise other issues that really and truly are not the crux of the problem?
Probably you can link that to the promise by the chairman of the RMAFC, the Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission, that, you know, the commission also wants to expand the revenue base.
Very true.
You know, when we begin to think revenue, and not production, we run into a very grave, let's admit, because, you know, these are nuanced conversations, that one of the big challenges in Nigeria is that we've not structured the system to understand taxation. And it comes from all sides. First of all, it comes from the fact that because of oil, for a long time, government did not want to bother the people with tax, so long as people don't ask us what we do with the oil money. There was that covenant, that accord unwritten between Nigerian people and those who govern them. And so they wasted the resources as they liked, and the people did not pay tax. Everybody was happy in their corner. Now we need to break that, because there's clearly, you know, the whole revolution of no taxation without representation. Your ability to hold government accountable is based on the fact that you are paying taxes and all of that. However, as we progress in trying to get people to own government by paying taxes and therefore ensuring that more people are captured in the tax net and so on and so forth, it's also an interesting factor that is not often... the Nigerian is the most taxed person in the world, in a manner of speaking, not formal taxes.
We pay out of pocket for everything. Besides
paying out of pocket for everything, all your relations on top of you, every luncheon in your village, this is reality. Yeah. The guy in France who you are using his matrix to structure model to essentially compute this is not dealing with those factors. So we have to come up with our own truly creative, original model that we use.
Well, on that note, we'll have to go. I know you addressed that in your book, your concept about African communalism, the Ubuntu philosophy. I am, because we are. But we'll have to close it.
And congratulations on the book.